I will start with the studio tours, and then I will tell you things about my creative and my works. So welcome to my studio. This is Moran.
Hi, I'm the technical assistant for today's class.
Okay, so let's go.
Hello, welcome. My paleta.
So we're almost done with the tour, and I put the camera back in the starting point.
I hope it's okay that you succeed to see something for my studio. Okay, so as I say, my name is Hadas Levi. I'm a painter. I finished Bezalel in 1999. I'm married to Moran, and I'm a mom for two boys, Ido and Itamar. I think I will start to talk about the creative process. So I leave just the painting. My creative process starts with listening to the heart. I mean the things that I love, excite, see, read, hear music, all the things that that touch my soul. I stop and collect them in my notebook. I will show. This is my notebook. And I write, and it looks like shopping list. There is just a word. Most of the time, I paint people around me and myself, family, friends. After that, I see a picture in my mind, and then I start to find the images from my shopping list and connect all on the canvas. I start always with spot color, never drawing before. All the preparation work is in my head, in my mind. Before I go to sleep, at the shower, when I don't think, the images come to my mind, and I like tripping at the canvas that I didn't paint, that I will paint. The images that I choose are not fixed to the Instagram. And I mean, they revealing something that we want to hide. They are not beautiful, but for the painting, they are. Art for me is like to get into endless, like our soul. It's like to revealing the things behind the emoji. In the painting, I make a wish. When I paint, there is no good or bad. There is no past and future. It's like to break patterns. My paintings are like enigma, and I don't always solve. Sometimes yes, but sometimes no. And then I can't talk about the painting with the word, because paintings, when I see a painting, is like an energy that comes to me before I can know what I see at the paintings. I don't need to know what I am doing. I just need to paint the things that I see in my mind. And I put these paintings, I start with this. The name of the paintings is Where Are My Jimmy Choo? It's a collage from photos. This is my cat. And this from other photos of my hands and my face. This is a garbage from a house that makeover house. And this is the sandals of Jimmy Choo. I hope you know him. I want to show beauty, a broken beauty, or a ideal beauty, or a status beauty. I want to show the treat that we, for our body, and the treat for house. And I mean like a Botox or a surgeon to be more beautiful and more attractive, yes. If I could choose a place to put this painting, I choose the shop, the beautiful shop of Jimmy Choo, the perfect. And this is example for what I mean when I say to see what is behind the emoji, what is behind the beauty that we sell in our Instagram. That's it. I think I'm not a judgment, anyone. It's just an offer. Okay, I will bring the savior of the world. So, this paint I call the savior of the world, my mom, and I painted when I read the newspaper and the written about Leonardo da Vinci painting that called Salvator Mundi. I hope you know. And he held in his hands a crystal ball, like a symbol to the world. And when I saw it, and it's sold in more than 400 million, and it was a lot of noise about it. And when I saw it, I remember a photo that I made to my mom when she drink a cup of tea. And then I saw it in my mind that I will change the cup of tea to the crystal ball. The idea is to try to describe the relationship between parents and mother and daughter without connect to what was the relationships between them, if they was closer or not. My mother don't really likes arts, so I didn't show her this painting, but my friend showed her photo, and she said, "Why is my clothes are so
not unfancy?"
So that is, I was afraid that she will say, "Why is her skin so squeezed?" I will bring another painting. A minute. These are two self-portraits. I start them after I heard that our mind are like water, like three position, liquid, steam, and ice. And I really love the idea. I heard about the idea at the Kabbalah. It's from the Zohar book. It's a book of Jewish. And I call my sons Ido to photo me, once with a flower in my hands at our home, and the other I put a mustache in a, a blue color, and a glass with ice. And I thought this is a paintings that call truly. It's an ice mind. It's a pattern. And this one I call love glasses. And it's like a steam mind. It could move and be without a pattern, and have a lot of points of view about life. That's it.
Hadas really tries to demonstrate a real studio visit. By just changing the picture around the center this time.
So, this painting, I call him Butterfly to Flower. And this photo, my sister take from my mother's bed when she felt not so good. She was ill. And I paint her. She is the oldest in the family, with the youngest, Nuri. Is the son of my sister. I was thinking about energy of giving, natural giving, like butterfly to flower. This I was photo in one of our trip. And it's like a wish for me to live with this energy of living. And I wish that the world will live with this energy, with no judgments about people, and like give everybody the same. And it's about love everybody. And I paint the blanket to connect between the outside and the inside, like a view of a mountain. I try to connect everything to one. When my sister saw this painting, she said, wow, it was really darkness photo. And now it's so light. So I think that we can find a present in every situation of our life if we change our point of view. I'll bring another one.
אני אשים אלון שלי.
כן.
לא, השאלה אם זה בגוף טוב.
This one is a self-portrait. I took it from a lot of photos. These things, I do a mask at the Purim Chag. It's
The Jewish Halloween. It's called Purim.
So I make it for myself, and I take the pattern from a wallpaper, and there's a bee here, and this is my nose, and this is a photo of one of my jackets. And I call this painting Still Life, Plant, Alive, Human Being, Love. I was trying to get a feeling how is to be one with all the things that around us. I learned a little bit yoga, and there's a breath that called Soham, and it's mean me is you. This idea that everything around us, even still life, has a soul, and all the soul are connected to one thing. For me, it's God, but everybody can find his way to look at this, and I want to feel it. It's an idea that I read about it at the Kabbalah, and it was very excited for me. So it's like a wish too for me. And it's paint that talk about the truth of life. And the bee knows the truth because she can feel what is the real flower. And I want to live with this feeling of true and the lie. This is a sage. We make a pita with this. I met some special woman. She's my hair design. And when I saw her first, she told me about her story, and I paint her portraits on the sage. She called Ada, and she told me about that her son, that her husband died from an illness, and after that her son died too. And I call this painting the woman who saw Medusa eyes and stay alive. I took the idea from Michelangelo, that he paint the face of Medusa on again?
Shield.
On shield. So this is my shield. And when I met her, she was so alive, and she's like eating life with big
Bites.
big bites. And I was charmed from her, inspired of her story. So this is the painting. There's a bird here that's called in Hebrew draw. How we say it in English?
Freedom.
Freedom. That's it. This paint is a collage too of a few photos. A photo of this girl. She's a girl of my friend called Tamar. A photos of this boy called Dro, and he's the son of my sister. And this photo of Sphinx cats that I get in my WhatsApp, and the monkey doll. And when I start to paint this, all the time I heard that this is the painting of the girl who stay awake. And I didn't know why, and who is the girl who stay awake. And when I finish paint her, I exchange her eyes, and I put my eyes on her face. After I finish this painting, the monkey is too with my eyes, the doll. When I finish this painting, I understand that the girl who stay awake is every woman who has a hard story from the childhood, that remember this story, and when one of her children have a hard story, she remember, and she's more smart than a woman who didn't
Go through the same experience.
Yes, and it's about the experience that we have in life and how they help us in the journey. And I understand this because my sister told me something about her son that is here, that happens to him, and it's really similar things that happen to her. And it was after I finished the painting, I was very exciting, because painting is like be connect to high worlds. I don't know. And because of that, I think that I don't need to know what I am doing. I just need to be clean and to do what the paintings tell me. Okay.
Okay. The last one is coming.
Yes. So this one called helplessness.
Helplessness.
Helplessness. This is a photo when I buy a present to my children, the water gun. And this is the Times Square. I paint this after I was in New York, my first time and the only time. And I came to the Times Square and I was Spanish. And it was too much for me. All the light and the visual
visual stimulation.
Yes, it was. But I felt like this is the center of the world. And I paint this when one of my children has a problem that I couldn't solve, and I was thinking like a mother that maybe I didn't give him the good good tools for life, and then I will think about my tools, and it was felt for me like I hold the gun water on the Times Square, something that's very not connected to anything. And because of that, my face are not sharp, and that's it, I think. We finish with with this.
It's very good. I think that's very very helpful introduction to your work. And so let's move on to Doug's presentation, and after Doug's presentation, we'll circle back and have a conversation about both of your work. Okay.
Thank you very much for your listening.
Thank you. That was really terrific. Hi. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Grazie mille. That means thank you in Italian. This is something that I was working on in 2018, and it sort of predates the whole like trashing of equestrian monuments, rightly so. But so in some way, this will maybe contextualize some of the work when I start at the beginning. This is called it's called Fragment Forward. It's an equestrian monument, and that's chroma key green screen paint that I painted on this shed out in back of the studio, and that's a fragment of a horse body there, of a taxidermy zebra form from Mackenzie Taxidermies. I've used this horse over the years for a bunch of different things. But a couple of years ago, a big chunk of my work has been about sort of like disassembling the idea of the heroic male object. And a couple of years, and through the slides that I'm going to go through shortly here, you'll see that there's been a kind of like dismantling of what is conventionally masculine or maybe conventionally male, balanced with some ideas about my own kind of personal history. So I targeted the equestrian monument a couple of years ago. This one's in Rome, and there is no more egregious expression of masculinity pushed to the most horrendous degree as a guy on a horse. And I wanted to sort of like take that down and make an expression of what it is. I'm an old white guy, I'm a 57-year-old white guy, and old guys on horses and guys in my position need to sort of examine themselves. This is a video. So this is just setting up some situations where I'm covering myself with porcelain clay and doing things like this. Yeah, so I'm gonna go to the beginning now. At the front of this, this is a piece that I made in Italy. I did a residency there in 2017. I think I called it Saint, but it was a real thrill to go to Italy, and I'm showing it here. This was a sort of interesting object for me. Of note is that the eyes are closed. This is another one that is pretty interesting to me too. And in a minute, I'm going to talk about like why it is that what it is that makes work successful to me. And there's a lot of things that I'm going to show you that I don't think are particularly successful things that I've made. This was a good one. This is called Deacon, like a church deacon. Not it's a lowercase d. And on the right is where I made it in Zanesville, Ohio. I did a residency. I made this residency in this pioneer school in Zanesville, Ohio. It was a 100-year-old deserted elementary school. And I was there in 2016. And the room that I built this figure in, that's where it's situated. On the left is what it looks like in Traver Gallery in downtown Seattle. I think good sculpture, I think objects that are important carry their meaning with them wherever they go, and are not necessarily situated into one particular place. This is I'm gonna up front here. I have some of the most recent things that I've done. This is an installation. This is a show that I had in Portland called Rubric, and a rubric is a kind of like set of criteria that you might use to set up to grade or to evaluate. And I was thinking a lot about, you know, I've taught since 1994. And I think I wanted to sort of examine something about what was going on in the climate in the studio classroom with the kind of demographics that I was working with. And so all of these things, these three personas are kind of like amalgams of different kind of student profiles and kind of like psychological, gender, racial, you know, religious kind of like profile things. And it bombed. I hated this thing. It was terrible, 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 except for her. But you know, this thing is like, when I find myself thinking too much about what it is that I'm trying to say, and I'm not saying thinking is bad, but when I find myself like constructing meaning in a way that doesn't necessarily come more directly or initially from inside of me, I flop. And this thing with the desks is something that I tried once before when I was in grad school. This is me at the Art Institute of Chicago. And I found all these desks in a Salvation Army, like down on Grand Avenue. And my whole family is teachers. My dad taught dropout prevention in South Florida to 4th and 5th graders, and taught mostly Black and brown kids. That was the neighborhood that I lived in. I grew up in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and this is my first year of grad school. And I had this idea that I'd make this classroom of all these, you know, different kinds of people. And I would set this classroom structure up, and that it would mimic, you know, something of like the sociological complexion of our country, and it just bombed. You won't see images of it, but it was just terrible, because I had this terrible critique with some visiting artist named Tony Hepburn, who convinced me they were all going to have uniforms, these things, and he convinced me that I should show all this stuff that I was writing on their bodies, because that's where the real direct sort of guts of this work were. And I did it, and it was a scar, but it was a good one. Anyway, so of the rubric show that I just showed you with those three figures in it, I think this was a good thing that came out of it. I had this object, and I had one more desk left that I decided to do something with. And this is called Anthropic Unit. The yellow in African culture is a color that's symbolic of intelligence. And can you see my cursor?
Yeah.
Okay. And like this stuff back here, which looks like sort of ritual scarification, is kind of like the African symbol for intelligence. So this is kind of like solitary piece. I think was a good one. But I told Tim that I would show some early things, and this thing on the left is the earliest object that I ever made. I used to be a trumpet major. I went to college. All my life I was a trumpet player, and I went to college on a trumpet scholarship, and and stopped doing that almost immediately, and I changed my major to art. I went to look at this place called the Appalachian Center for Arts and Crafts in Smithville, Tennessee. It was affiliated with Tennessee Tech University, where I'm timing myself, where I was a trumpet major. And this little thing on the left, when I got there, I went to look at this place, and the clay guy was named Tom Rippon, and he was learning how to play trumpet on his own. And I saw a trumpet in his studio, and he convinced me that I should come there, and I could teach him to play trumpet, and he would teach me about making art. So that's what I did. And this was the very first thing I made on the left, which I think in some way has never really changed for me. And on the right is the most absolute recent thing I've made. It's and those are my hands in both of these things. It's Saint Teresa of Avila, and this is finished. It's built from clay, and the arms are life casts of my arms in hydra stone. So it's I know that there are several pictures of Saint Teresa or paintings, and there's most famously, I should have an image of it in here, but the Ecstasy of Saint Teresa by Bernini, which is in Rome. And I was interested in doing a female figure because up until recently, this was kind of where I lived over here. I have this kind of like split brain up until March, and it stopped in March because I deliberately moved. These men over here are the men of Cara's place, and it is and the women and this group of there's no men in this group. In other words, this group of guys is a transitional house for men in addiction recovery through the Salvation Army. And I was the resident manager of it for 4 years. So I was the person on site who would catch these guys when they were coming out of detox. And it was a faith-based place that I lived in for 4 years, and I managed it. And on March 10th, I stopped doing it. And so I would live here, and I would go to the University of Washington where I teach. And this class of women, where I had this brain that I had to put on, and going home and coming to school. And this is an intermediate ceramic figure class. So on those platforms where these women stand were going to be life-size. However, they were going to interpret what life-size human object meant, and so I was really compelled to understand what it is to be in the community of them. So I wanted to make a female figure, and I had made them before. I had made what I think are honorable female human objects. I like the term human object better than figure, by the way. If I speak figuratively, I'm speaking away from the truth, like a figure of speech. So human object talks about the thing that I'm making, but it also talks about its content. So I tried making this thing. It was like an archangel, and I was trying to make it sort of like a piece of armor, and the wings are color Xeroxes from two paintings of the Annunciation, one from the Ghent altarpiece and one from Fra Angelico's, or I'm sorry, yeah, Fra Angelico's Annunciation, just sort of like put on this thing with fake linoleum marble for the base. It was just a piece of crap, because I was thinking too hard about trying to please, I guess. I've made female figures before that I think were quite honorable. You'll see this one later. This is Seated Mother. And this is called Weeping Belief. This is from like 2004, maybe. And you can see that up around the face, that is an early hominid. It's Australopithecus africanus, which was what Lucy was in Olduvai Gorge. It has a little tear running down its face, kind of like a weeping Mary or something like that. It's like a weeping icon to anthropology. This is Elizabeth, Saint Elizabeth, as in mother of Saint John the Baptist. And this is a pool here. So This is actually kind of a baptismal font, but these are the female figures that I made before this Saint Teresa of Avila. And I had been reading Saint Teresa of Avila because I have a kind of, I have a contemplative, faith stance, not necessarily Catholicism, but, contemplatives in all faith traditions have very much in common. This is what Teresa looked like on day one. And these are some process shots of what it is. I work with clay primarily, but I work with a bunch of different materials as well. But clay is important to me. It's like it's my new, clay turned into my new trumpet. Process shots. So she has casts of my arms, and the arms are movable. So you can see from this picture that she's posable. And the lovely thing about this is that I had read, I don't know if you guys know about this, but Teresa of Avila, the ecstasy of Saint Teresa, the Bernini thing where she's getting pierced through the heart by an arrow by some kind of angel, by a bunch of old Spanish Inquisition kind of popes and cardinals and stuff look at her like she's having an orgasm or something like that. To read her and to read her thoughts on contemplation and the depth of what that means, she was not loud like that. So I felt, that the Bernini piece, and I feel silly that I don't have an image of it here. I bet you have an image in your head though. The Bernini piece is what you'd call a cataphatic expression of faith, and the opposite of that is the apophatic version, which is a more kind of minimalist idea and understanding of this. This is BFA work. So the little guy that I was showing you that I had in my hand eventually got to be kind of big. And this is about 8 feet tall. There's about 7 of these, I think, in my BFA show in 1986. The work that I looked at, that my teacher started showing me, this was just Stephen de Stabler on the left. He's probably the one contemporary ceramic artist that was a powerful influence to me. And then the other stuff that he showed me was outsider art, people who didn't have art degrees, like S.P. Dinsmore here. And this is from the Garden of Eden in Lucas, Kansas. I went to this place and wept because it was amazing. So outsider artists, untrained artists, and then, people working with clay. And so this is called Martyr. And I didn't know anything about the human object. I never had a human object. I never had figure classes. I went to a craft school. I had clay, metal, wood, and fibers, and glass, And so I wanted to go to the Art Institute because I figured I needed some art history and I needed to be around people who were making things, in different ways. So I did. The Art Institute was the only school that I applied to. I just wanted to go there, and Tennessee was in the middle of the country. The Art Institute, as you well know, is situated in a metropolis. So from these things, which I consider to be my own kind of primitivism, to this work, which was my MFA thesis show at the Art Institute in 1989. From this to this, I mean, this one is an important figure because it kind of marks a transition of a decision that I made. This is after the ridiculous student desk thing, but this marks a kind of transition to move deliberately towards realism, which wasn't too difficult. And this is the group of objects that were in the thesis show in Chicago. They're not based on specific people. I don't use models. At this point, I wasn't even using molds. I really don't use molds unless I have a good reason to sort of situate the actual into the symbolic. But there was a guy on a bench on Columbus Drive who in the depths of winter would sit on this bench all bundled up, but he would look at it, he'd hold his feet out and in front of him and look at him. I passed him every day. And he had the most beautiful feet. And many of I used to live over on Division and Noble. That won't make, I'm sure it doesn't look anything like that, but I lived right near what used to be Cabrini Green. And so my neighborhood had many people of color in it. And I used to wait on the bus and sit on the train and with women like this, not specifically like this, but this is kind of an effigy, I think, of many people. And this is the most, I think this is the most important thing I've ever made in my life, this thing, which I call Angel. Oh, all of these things have stigmata. This one did too. And I remember this is a figure that's based on a Down syndrome human. And I remember there was a guy that, I shouldn't get myself in trouble here, but the guy that was he was in the art therapy department at the Toot. And he came down and messed around with clay. He was throwing pots and stuff like that. Not the coolest guy. And he was seeing my work before this thing. And he pulled me in his office one day and he goes, "Hey, you want to see something really funny?" And I thought, nothing this guy has is funny. And he showed me this picture of this group of young Down syndrome people that were wearing those, those glasses with a nose and a mustache. They were all wearing that, and he had put them on all these kids and paraded them down some street like downstate in Illinois. And he thought that was funny. I thought it broke my heart, and I thought that had to be answered somehow. And so I made this, and one hand up and one hand down. That's a kind of like Renaissance device to speak of humankind's position between heaven and hell. Versailles and Albinus, the early practitioners of anatomical drawing, used it. And so here's this figure that is anything but what you would call dumb. It's wise. And something happened to me on this piece that moved me towards my faith. And right, this, then this, and I had Dennis Adrian was one of my graduate advisors, and he said, you're doing all this figure work, you should start thinking about tradition of Western figurative sculpture. And I was not at all interested in it because it was full of junk like this, and guys like this, like Apollos and Neptunes and Zeuses and whatever. And I wasn't really interested in it all because there was nothing that I considered heroic about me. Here's the thing. If I'm making this work and I'm not using models or molds or anybody, and painting the eyes with a one bristle brush and putting nail polish over them to make them clear, and if I'm sitting across from this thing and it's not based on anybody, then what is the persona or the psyche that's staring back at me? It surely must be something to do, it surely must be my own, And I think that's not a ridiculous thing, but to say that I could understand something about what is inside of me by looking into the eyes of this object is interesting. And I could never figure out how to do that with this. So I started working on young male figures, which is what I was at the time. I'm not even 30 yet. And I started looking at the tradition of pedestal sculpture as something to kind of dismantle. This is the first piece, that I ever made. I think Tim, you and I were talking about this, but this is the first thing that I ever made where the fragment or fragmentation became a part of the vocabulary. It's called Hero. And you'd never know that there was anything truly heroic about this thing, except maybe that the truly heroic thing in male figures is introspection and quietness. And pensiveness, and not being loud and not waving a weapon. So I started making work that was dealing with like the kind of canon of figure sculpture. But this is a real dead tree, and this is wood that I found in some barn in Alfred, New York, where I started teaching. I taught at the New York State College of Ceramics for 2 years, and this is work that I was making there. And I call this stuff scumbag statuary, because I'm a scumbag. Not really, but I use clay, and I put porcelain slip on top of the clay to try to make it seem like I'm disguising the humility of clay and putting something on it that echoes or is meant to sort of try to emulate the surface of marble, but it's just clay underneath, And so this is a piece called Ornament. Oh, this is called Sculpture, and this is called Ornament. And I love these things, and this is why I was flipped out to go to Rome. I like little devices like this support thing right here, and I love the objects that hold up. This is an Apollo, and this is my piece called Ornament. And this little bar right here, I see as this bar, that that kind of like, this is a subordinate figure that would hold up, in my mind, a more important figure like this guy. But this guy isn't here, and what's left is the support structure, and which I think has to do with just something about class. My dad was a teacher, and he was a labor guy. He was the president of the teachers union in Florida. So labor and the sort of like classes that occupy it have always been important to me, and which is one reason why making sculpture was always something that was like, making sculptures for people that have a lot more than you. And this is called Spunk, and takes a long time to make a face like this. Takes a long time to do the ears, to do the eyes, to do the fingernails, to do the wrinkles in the lips. And I made this thing, and it was like that. I made this in New York. This is around 1994 and 95. And this had arms, and it had like really good looking face and everything like that. And I just sawed it in half one day, and sawed the arms off and kind of broke it up. And I took the upper torso with the head, and I dunked it in a bucket of clay slop mud. And I put the whole thing in a kiln and fired it and took it out and stuck it together like this. And I didn't know why. And this is at Alfred, and this man this is me in my overalls, and this is Stephen DeStabler, who I showed you as one of the early influences of me. And he came and we taught together for a summer, a mentor. And I was talking to him about this piece, and I told him everything I just told you about it. And I said, yeah, I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing with this, because I'm working so hard, and then I'm taking the thing and I'm pushing it to the point of like destruction, and then looking at it and calling it finished. And pay attention to this phrase, because it matters so much. He goes, oh, I know exactly what you're doing, because I've reconciled it myself. He said this. He said, you're staving off the oppressive effects of virtuosity. Staving off the oppressive effects of virtuosity, which means it's not good enough to just make something. You have to understand why and where and what and who for and who not for. This is DeStabler's work here on the left, and DeStabler, people who don't look deep enough in this work think that these works were about nuclear destruction and blah 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 and decay, and they're not. They're about time, and they're about history, and they're about deep history. And this piece of DeStabler's, which I think was made in the 80s, I saw this, and then I went to Italy, and this is a piece of Bernini's on the right. This is clay, and this is wood, and this is metal stuff, and these are early surviving clay studies for the angels near St. Peter's Basilica. And DeStabler, one of the things that frees you up when you're not as concerned with virtuosity or where you take chances with it, it opens you up to kind of like eternity. And DeStabler here was thinking about time, and he had time in his hands, long time, deep history in his hands when he's moving the clay around in the present. That became really important to me. And this is from the Etruscan Museum, the Villa Giulia in Rome. And this is a piece of mine that's in progress, terracotta, in the same schoolroom I was in Zanesville, Ohio. And fragmentation could be a thing that isn't necessarily about being broken or missing something. Fragmentation could be something that has never really finished. You can fragment something by deciding that it doesn't need to be resolved somehow. And that's one aspect of what I've tried to do with my ideas about fragmentation. A lot of this work sort of overlaps in here, and I'm kind of arranging it thematically more than I am chronologically. This is David, like Bernini's David, like David is one of those canonical images in figure sculpture. I think most people here will know who I'm talking about when I talk about King David. But this is David, and that's who Michelangelo's David was, and that's who Bernini's was, and this is mine. And this is all made out of porcelain. It was a really difficult thing to make. And the arm is a life cast of my arm. So it shows you that this is David the boy. This is the book of Samuel, David, the boy, and this is the arm of David, the man. So you can situate with the fragment or fragmentation different aspects or different phases of one life situated in the same place at one time. And this arm, the arm that he would hurl, this, or he would sling the stone at that would drop Goliath. This is a place where David, the man, and that act is situated with the person who hasn't done it yet. Yeah, David, my David. What's weird about this thing is the shadow of it. I wish I had that here, but the shadow of this thing casts like a perfect profile of the Michelangelo David. Eerie. That stuff happens to me. This is him. So, this is older than that. This is 95, and this is called Heirloom. And that's another cast of my arm right there, tied around this guy's head, neck. And this is work that one of the reasons that one of those reasons where I have a didactic which will tell you about why it is that I'm trying to dismantle the human hero, but everybody has like a reason that's deeper than that. And mine was that which I came to understand as a viable thing to talk about in my praxis, is that I grew up without my mom, and she kind of like deserted us, and we didn't hear. I have a brother who just passed away, and she left us, and without a word, without a birthday card, without anything, from the time I was like 5th grade until I had just changed my major to art, which was around the age of 19, and then she showed back up, and she didn't handle it particularly well. So my whole thing with the fragmented figure was partially sort of understanding what it is to be one. This is kind of what I looked like when I was a baby. And so these things were, they stood up, I think, somehow, at least in terms of everything that I could say about heroic or anti-heroic male sculpture. But to me, it was about brokenness, and it was about being fractured and fragmented kind of within. Now I know that. And, this is from a show of figurines. I like these little chubby pooty figures. And I figured what happens to them when they turn 40? This is called Cherubio. And my mother's, I came to find this out after she showed back up because I knew nothing about her, but her name is Ballerini. And my grandfather and his brothers were immigrants from Italy, ornamental plasterers. Who wanted to get out of Italy because they didn't want to be fascist. So this is called Cherubio, and I think of it as a very Italian piece. The legs blew off in the kiln, which never seems to bother me because it always yields the kind of like phenomenon that I'm looking for. Yeah, this is John Henry. So sometimes the fragmentation, like I said, leaving things off. This is John Henry. Do you know the myth of John Henry? He's the guy who fought the steam drill and lost. And so in some way, John Henry is the archetype for, humankind's challenge, but with technology. And here again, here's the reemergence of this kind of Down syndrome figure face, because this was a time that I was feeling kind of lost in myself. And that Down syndrome figure for me, which I called Angel, always seemed to creep back up, or deliberately try to creep back up when I was trying to recapture something meaningful in my praxis. So this is John Henry. And then this guy happened. This is called Bodyguard. It was from a show that I had at Traver Galley. My sons went to Tennessee, and when my marriage ended, when they were 5 and 6, and my ex enrolled them in a Catholic school, and I was just worried about them and missing them and alone. And so I made this kind of like figure, like this little boy who would be some badass little boy who was dressed up like a priest, who would sit in the back of the school or the church, and anybody that hassled my kids, this guy would go and just pound them into the dirt. Not really good place to be. And then here's that Down syndrome figure again, and this is called Study in Antique White. This is a cast of each of my son's feet. This is a cast of my hand and my ex-wife's hand, just mangled. And I was trying to make a reclining nude here, And this was a piece that I made like just sort of in the midst of a really, really bad time for me. And it looks like this angel thing looks like it's completely lost in the midst of all this junk I was going to, and which involved addiction, frankly. And so I needed to make something better. And I made this. This is a show. This is a piece I made for my 10-year show at the University of Washington. It's called Access, and it is a life-size crucifixion. And if the Down syndrome figure and the Black woman, the seated mother, if what I would see staring back at me, if it was something that could only be something about my own psyche. This is the first piece I ever made that was, from a person that actually existed, who had a name. And I thought if I did this right, at a time when I was really looking, that I could see God staring back at me. And I did not. In fact, my friend Jeff Mitchell, I asked, who's a very close friend of mine, I said, man, what do you think of this thing? And he goes, Doug, I've never seen you make anything that seems like it's staring back with as much contempt as that. And that floored me for a while. This ladder is the ladder that I used to work on it. I thought of it as a ready-made, like a Duchampian ready-made. And here conceptually, it's like, yes, the Duchamp's bicycle wheel. So I have this is my answer to like a Duchampian ready-made. It's a kind of view that you would see the crucifixion through. So Duchamp and the crucifixion, largely the two most, pursued objects in Western art. In the same place at the same time. And this piece is in Antwerp, Belgium, somewhere. And the Saint Teresa, Mirabai Starr, who wrote the translation of Saint Teresa of Avila's Interior Castle, I sent Mirabai Starr just a couple images of the Saint Teresa, and she flipped out and loved it. And that piece is going to go to the Center for Action and Contemplation in Albuquerque. So I prayed my way out and dug my way out of addiction, and then started working with clay again. And clay is important because, it just takes anything. And this is these are some details of a piece that I was working on when I hadn't worked with clay for a bunch of years, and I really didn't know what I was making. And this thing I pushed it. At one point, this was, I didn't know where I was going with this head, and it just looked like it might have been kicked around some Mayan ball court, But I rebuilt it and turned it into this. This was this at once, and clay let me sort of like make it into this. It's called Jekyll, like Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It's like Jekyll having survived being Mr. Hyde. It's the first piece I made kind of into my sobriety. And this is called Disciple. I'm almost done. I think, at some point I was thinking about, the idea of what does a sculpture really do? What does a human object really do? A figure, if you will. What does it really do? What do all the things that I've done? What do they hold? What do they contain? They contain something of me. And I wanted to explore what it is to sort of to exploit that. And so I am not a performance artist, and I don't think of this as a performance, but it's me covered with clay, laying in a pine box. And it was in a sculpture exhibit. And I did not say that it was a performance. The materials list was clay, wood, museum stanchion, artist, pillow. That's it. I didn't do anything because I was thinking about when is a human object not a human, and when is it an object? This is Charles Ray on the top, and he was here as a visiting artist once, and he's what a brilliant artist this is. This is him. And this is his head relegated to the same material status as this gasoline can and this toolbox and this flower vase, yet his body is there. So does he make his head not his head? And does he make his head an object like the rest of these? I would say yes. And here's a one of these a bog person, don't know its name, found in a peat moss in Scotland. And the same could be said of mummies, you know, that are found years and years and years. But you know, his head is not really his head anymore, and this thing is not really a person anymore. It's a thing. And I wanted to see what it's like to exploit that, because when you make a human object that's more or less realistic, you know, it contains something of the self. So the Down syndrome, the angel piece, or the crucifixion, which I've come to reconcile myself to, or any of the other stuff that I've made, are inanimate objects. And I never use the word them or she when I talk about these things, because another graduate advisor, Barbara Rossi, at the Art Institute, I'd say, yeah, she or he, and Barbara would stop me and she'd go, Doug, this thing is never going to sing to you. It's never going to sneeze or fart. It's an it. Understand that. And the thing is, when you understand that about making inanimate objects, that frees you up. It's paradoxical. It frees you up to make them containers for things that hold the essence of being human. So this is called likeness. Like from Romans 6:5, so in the likeness of his death, we were buried, you know, maybe you don't know it. Anyway, it's me in a box, kind of functioning like a baptismal font, but that is actually me. It's a cast of my body. Look at, can you see what this is? This is a mold of my body and my hands, and there's a vacant space underneath it for me to lie into it and stick my clay covered head up there and be with the piece. This is the back of it. That's me inside of it. And that's what it looks like. So those, I mean, you can look at these fingers and you can see that they're painted, but these are casts of me, of my hands, cast of my torso. And I was in this thing for an opening. There was a human form symposium at this place called Aramont, and I was in it for like 4 hours. And again, Doug Jeck, likeness, sculpture, clay. It was in a sculpture show, and it was interesting to be in this thing and to hear myself addressed as a sculpture. It was not a performance. Again, it was just like me being a sculpture instead of my sculptures being me. I had done one earlier, way earlier, just kind of like it. Look, same thing, body that I made, hands cast from one of my boys. This is called Geppetto Stupor. Geppetto, as you may know, was the guy who made Pinocchio. And I thought, what? And so a couple of students of mine started this gallery in Seattle called Soil. And they asked me if I'd do a piece for it, and I did, a performance piece. So this is what I did. I thought, I made this, I think, when I was maybe like 32. And I thought, what am I going to look like when I'm 50? I thought, I'm going to be this fat little guy, you know, and I sprayed the whole thing with bourbon. And there was a like recording of me tickling my sons there. And again, I'm underneath this thing, sticking my head up through it. So, and I made a couple photographs of, you know, myself being, this is called Maker. Situations where I'm making things. This guy was a grad student and he was like my assistant. This was just a whole situation that seemed to be historical, like much of my work, but isn't really historical. And what does it mean to sort of like set up this, I built this whole room out of styrofoam, spray painted and covered with sand, sorry. And built this little figure, put a prosthetic nose on, covered myself with clay. And I just thought, you know, what am I? I'm like this old, you know, white guy sculpture person making all this stuff in a kind of like outmoded idea. And that's what I do. That's what I am. That doesn't sound, I mean, I made it as a kind of like catharsis, you know. And again, like me whipping the horse, this was like some video too, and there was, you know, a little bit of sound to it, but it lives mostly as still photographs. And the horse, and that, and that. And I love the idea that this is in Rome, this is at the Capitolini Museum. I love the idea that somebody's conjecture about what this once was is only based on the parts here, you know, and that this is Caravaggio's conversion of St. Paul, that a horse can do something good for you if you're too much of an arrogant douchebag. And so this is called fragment forward Damascus. And the idea here is that you can take this green screen thing that's slapped on the side of the barn, and you can take me and this piece of horse, and you can green screen out my hands. You can situate me as a fragment anywhere you want, and that means that I can be floated as an old white guy and stuck in a context. You could put me in Las Vegas. You could put me in the Painted Desert. You could put me on Mars. You can put me anywhere, and that's it.
Very, very interesting presentations. And I don't have a particular place to go with this in terms of the conversation, but for one thing, were there any questions that you had received that you wanted to respond to in the questions that I sent you last night?
Which I haven't seen yet. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Are they in email?
I sent them in as an email. I think you got the questions, right? You got the questions that I sent?
Yes, of course.
Were there any of those questions you wanted to respond to?
About the corona and this period that we live, I think that my works does not change, not yet, because I'm very slowly, and it's take time for me to understand what is going on here. I mean, in our world, little world. I don't remember all the questions, but about this significant behind my creation. So I think is to reveal the things that we don't want to show. I paint everything that is human, and everything that human being doing, it's good for me to paint. And for me, realistic art is to paint not just what I see, what I feel about the things that I see. And I feel like everything that around us is like the emoji that we send for friends with a smiley or a weeping, but there is something else that someone wants to tell us. My friends, my mother that writes something and put a little painting. So my painting try to see that all the people are connected and more similar than different. And from what Doug explained about his work, I understand our connecting, that we are connecting with our arts, a lot of similar things that I saw.
I guess one question, this word might be unfamiliar to you, but I'm sure it's not to Doug. The idea of abject art, or I'm thinking of the idea of abject art, but I'm also thinking about the idea of authenticity, which are, it seems like both of you are aiming for something that's authentic, as opposed to, say, Renaissance ideals or contemporary notions of beauty. Maybe you could talk around that a little bit.
Yeah, I think, I mean, now I see these questions. I'm sorry, I didn't see them last night or this morning, but I saw that one. I think, like I like your point, Hadas, you're saying that you don't see a past and you don't see a future, and that the works are more enigmatic. I think, with object making, like the human object, it's like the opposite of, I think of the word gestalt a lot, and that gestalt, if you're not familiar with it, gestalt is like, it's what like James Joyce called aesthetic arrest. I think he wrote it in Portrait of the Artist as a young man. But aesthetic arrest is like the gestalt. The gestalt is something where everything is put in front of you. All the information that you need to know is there, and you have to decipher it and you have to work backwards from it. It's the opposite of linear narrative. Like if you write a book, like a piece of literature, and you're a writer, you're going to unfold the character page after page. If you're reading that book, you're going to know more about the character that you're reading about. I'm talking about fictive literature here. I'm not talking about nonfiction because that's history, but fictive literature. I'll know more about the character that you wrote for me on page 3 than I did on page 1. I'll know more about the character on page 50, and then I'll know more about the character and the engagement that the character finds with other characters by the end of the book. That's linear narrative. When you're making a sculpture, or I think sometimes maybe as much if you're making a painting, you're not giving people the chance to sort of you're not giving people a situation where they're building meaning incrementally. It's gestalt is this thing where everything is set in front of you at once, and you have to decipher it using the kind of human tools that you have. That's once I think you understand that phenomena, like and this is what I love about clay. Clay is this thing that it's not like a chunk of marble, and I work hollow. I don't work with clay in a big solid chunk. It's not a subtractive process. It's like making a big pot in the shape of somebody, and it'll only hold itself up when it's wet to a certain point. So I have to leave the thing if I get as far as the knees on a good day. And I leave the thing at the knees and go away and watch the news or read a book or prepare something or take a hike or go camping or something like that. And I come back and the thing is the same as I left it, but I'm not. I might have listened to something last night. I might have had a crisis. I might have had an epiphany, and that gets inserted into the object. And all of that matters in the end of it. And I think that, because the object sort of resists, being constructed in a linguistic way, it speaks to things that have to do with the soul.
You agree, Hadas?
I agree. I didn't understand all the things that you explained, but I agree about linear time. And I read about an idea that called superposition, that all the opportunity already exist. And we choose to light every time on one opportunity. And I think that in my paintings, I want to bring this idea of time and all the options.
Well, that seems really true with Doug as well. It feels like both of your work really has a lot to do with time.
Mm-hmm.
Ruptured time. I guess another question another similarity I saw that was really interesting is, Hadas, you talked about referring to the Kabbalah and referring to Old Testament literature and related to a faith tradition, as Doug talked about that, which in contemporary art, that's kind of a liability.
Yep.
Or at least it has been presented as a liability to admit that you have some sort of connection to a tradition of faith.
Yeah.
So I was I'm not sure where to go with that as a question. It's more an observation. But if you want to say anything about that, you're welcome to.
Hmm. Yeah, there was no more unpopular thing to be at the Art Institute of Chicago in 1987 to 1989, in the midst of Baudrillard, in the midst of post-structuralist, deconstructivist, and Kant, and everybody was screaming that stuff. There was no more uncool thing to be than a brand new Christian. And when I say that, I had nothing in my background that would prepare me, that move. It doesn't. I wasn't looking for it, you know. And I'm not trying to proselytize, and I'm not trying to preach here. I'm not at all, because there's too much of that done by idiots. And no, it's. But I don't think that. I think the problem with it is that there are too many people who mess it up. There are too many people who are judgmental. You know, I mean, speaking about the Torah or any read. There's a really good book that I'm reading now by Mirabai Starr, who's writing this book. It's called Wild Mercy. It's about women mystics in all faith traditions, like Sufi. Like the Sufi Hindu thing is like the contemplative, like contemplative Christian is Sufi Hindu. And so the core thing in like all the world's faith structures, it has to do with something numinous. I mean, it has to do with a kind of numinous sort of essential yearning to find something about, you know, the core of ourselves and where that is. And, you know, unfortunately, what begins, you know, as a poetic metaphor of that numinous quality, which is scripture or the Quran or any other pieces of literature, is that theology and the human ego co-ops it as like a set of fundamentalist answers that can be pulled up and quoted to sort of like commit people or condemn them, you know. And that's unfortunately most people understanding about, you know, humankind's, you know, reach for whatever God is to them or whatever, whoever, however that is. Sometimes, you know, the structures and the politics of humanness, which is the ugly part of humanness, get in the way, and you have a bunch of people, you know, like evangelicals who are as far away from what Christ was supposed to be about as the Romans who nailed him to the cross were, you know. So I mean, yeah, there's a lot of people that do it wrong, you know, and or who do it dumb.
Yeah. Well, another artist who comes to mind, actually, as you were talking, is Flannery O'Connor, who.
Yeah.
Hadas, are you familiar with the American writer Flannery O'Connor?
No, I don't know.
You should try reading her sometime. Your work reminds me a little bit of her. Her stories always, they're often very disturbing, but it's in the way that your paintings can be disturbing, where you're not trying to make a picture that answers the question or says this is nice and pretty, but it's a kind of work that's constantly causing the viewer to think, right? Yeah. Anyway,
But for me, it's beauty. Even when people can say that it's scary or disturbing, I feel that I paint life with the black and white of the piano, you know, and this is the complete, you know, of our life.
Yeah.
So it's beautiful for me.
I think you know, your the butterfly to the flower, that painting that you showed, it's the old woman and the baby.
Mm-hmm.
there's something about that. That's the image that you show that sticks the most in my head, because I think this is really true. Like it's another paradox. Like the most intimate expression, and I'm not talking about self-absorbed, I'm not talking about spilling your diary out in a painting or a sculpture, but I mean ultimately the most intimate thing, the most core gesture that you can offer as a person, the thing that is the most yours, paradoxically becomes the most universal. I think like that painting is a good example of it. We will never know who that old woman is. You told us. We'll never know who the baby is, but you told us. But the thing is, that's an old woman, and that's a baby that we all know. That's a situation that we all know, even though it's so connected to you. And you know what it sounds like, you know what it feels like, you know more about it than just what you painted. But we know about it too, because it's so much yours. It's connected to all of us. I believe that's true. I do. Doesn't happen everywhere, but I mean that to me is a beautiful painting, and because it does extend itself out to us, it extends itself to our belief systems. It doesn't push us away from our belief system, and it doesn't pull us into yours. It just makes itself known.
So I can say what is the most excited work that I saw in your sculpture of the Down syndrome, the boy. I love all the things that you told us about, and it was very touched and intimate.
Thanks.
I had to express myself in English, so it's so slowly. I'm sorry. I want to say more, but I don't know how.
We have nothing to complain about, because we can't speak. I can't speak any other. I speak a little bit of French, but the French people I've been around said, please speak English. I think your work speaks Latin really, really beautifully.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, we've gone.
I have a question, Tim.
Go for it.
Okay. I have a question for you, Doug. I was really surprised and excited when you started talking about like the focus of your work and sort of deconstructing this like heroic male narrative, and just talking about like this tradition coming from white males specifically. And I was just curious, I mean, you are a white male, and so I was just curious, like, how you came to that perspective, and like, was there an experience that you specifically pushed you in a different direction, or like, did you just grow up with like mindsets? I was just really curious how you came to that position as an artist.
Yeah, I don't think that there was. I don't think that I was. My father was a teacher. And my dad was like an ultra liberal person, and he was kind of too old to be a hippie. I think he probably would have been, but that's not what I mean. But I think I don't know, the kinds of guys that I saw that were acting like monkeys were never too interesting for me to hang around with.
Yeah.
And I don't. I know exactly what it is, and but I think I've seen that. I grew up pretty poor, and we grew up, we never had a car, and so I was a paper boy. That was my first job, and I delivered in the neighborhood that I lived in, and I'm not trying to ignoble myself in some way, but it's just, I don't come from a platform that had anything to do, with the patriarchy, and I had no formal kind of religion thing that I had to dump. I had no kind of like and neither my dad wasn't interested in any of that. So I didn't have anything that I had to jettison in terms of like, you know, a kind of patriarchal umbrella that
Right.
was over me. You know, there a lot of people don't. You know, a lot of people do, but you know, it sucks being sort of linked by association to it. You know, it
Yeah.
does. But I don't know. It wasn't. It's not something that I felt. I feel like I have to cultivate because I want to be participate. It's just it's the way to be a person. You know, the way to be a person
Yeah.
doesn't involve any kind of hierarchy at all.
Yeah.
Is that an answer?
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Thank you.
Yeah. It's not. It's not. I'm not trying to. That's why I wanted to show the equestrian thing
Yeah.
now, because I've been working on it for years. You know. But thank you for that question. I hope I answered it or approached it.
I was I've been the past few years especially just like I've always found like traditional art to be really beautiful in some ways, but I'm also now understanding a lot of like the underlying narratives and problems with some of the mindsets and the context surrounding that kind of art. And so I've become really interested in still trying to like share the beauty of that art, but also like help people realize like what's the narrative here and like how can we challenge that and how can we work with that versus like I know some people who just reject it entirely, and I don't think we need to reject tradition entirely. I think you can meld it a little bit and work with it.
I agree. I know, because I went to Italy. You know, I was in Rome. You know,
Yeah.
I walked through the, and I'm so happy I didn't go to Rome. You know, like my whole life, I didn't go to Rome until like 2017. You know, 3 years ago, and I'm so happy that I didn't. You know, because it was, and I walked around that place, and you know, like do you know the Bernini Ecstasy of Saint
Yeah.
Teresa?
Yeah.
Like if you've read Saint Teresa of Avila, you just like, what the fuck? Excuse me. Like, what was this guy? You know, who allows this to happen? And church after church after church, and you know, places. I know what you mean. Like the world is rife with that stuff. But the thing is, it's like, yeah, it serves. It's there. You know, I hope, you know, there's. It's one of the things that sort of bothers me a little bit about yanking down monuments here in some way. I understand the impulse of that moment, and I'm not saying that, you know, that those things should be extolled or worshipped or something like that, but there is a little bit of something that's in me that like, you know, unless I think they could take all the Confederate generals on this street in Richmond. If you ever been to Richmond, where all those horseback dudes are, it's sickening. They could take them, you know, and they could bury them underground like the terracotta warriors, you know, in China, and just do that with them. But to utterly destroy them is problematic, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it was hard to look at that much marble, but thank goodness for the Etruscan Museum, where everything's made out of clay, where you can see the fingerprints of the people. Largely, many women made that Etruscan stuff. You know,
Amazing.
I'm gonna shut up now.
No, thank you. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
You know, we've gone quite long here, and I really appreciate the time that both of, well, I should say all three of you have given to us. Thank you, Ron. Your assistance is nice as well.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
We know you're
I'm still here.
Nice work, Moran.
I try to do my best.
Perfect.
Well, I would like to go on and on, but we've gone past our time limit. So
sorry.
No.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yeah. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. I love your Instagram feed. Peace.
Okay. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.